Everybody, welcome to this session. We are letting people in as I speak. Just going to wait for more people to trickle in, and will officially open in a moment. Oh, there's a raised hand already. Hello, Colleen. Let us let people in for now. I can see there's still more and more people coming in. So maybe I will start with our introduction, or with my introduction. And as more people are coming in, we can get to the contents. So first of all, welcome, dear guests. Good morning, good afternoon, and even good evening in some parts of the world. A warm welcome to all of you from Europe and to all parts of the world. My name is Tanja Plötz, and I'll be your host for this session on true cost accounting, or TCA. We will be talking about the true cost of food, from shifting markets to informing policy. This topic has already been tagged in the annual conference of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Last Tuesday it was, March 15th. Now here in our session, we will go a little bit more into a deep dive on the topic and reflect it from the different angles. So, welcome again. Before we continue, let me assure you that we will share all the materials with you after this event. The session will be recorded, is actually being recorded as we speak now. So we will share the recording as well, and you will receive information on all that, the presentations, the materials, the recording in our follow-up. You will see the possibilities for a Q&A below. So you have the opportunity to share your questions, to post your questions. Please do so. And we will try our best to answer them within the given time. We will see if that's if we have enough time to do it orally, or otherwise the speakers can also respond in writing. Your input is definitely very welcome, so please do post your questions or comments. Now, a brief introduction for you to know who it is that you are listening to. I've been working with WWF Germany for over 11 years now. I'm senior advisor on sustainable food systems, and I'm also part of a fantastic team of colleagues working on agriculture and land use and on food-related issues at WWF. I'm overseeing a program on sustainable consumption and production in the Global South. And so I've been working with WWF offices and partners in various countries and on different continents even. And as we've been trying to install a new vision on what it really means to be transforming food systems towards sustainability, it slowly dawned upon us that the true cost accounting approach could very well help us in manifesting such a vision, in an approach to make it comprehensive, integrated, systems-oriented, and yet practicable. That sounds like a big task, and let me tell you, it is. But I'm by no means alone in this quest. Today, we've lined up a fantastic collection of speakers who will all very expertly add to the discussion, and various aspects of such a vision or model on being able to rationalize all the costs and the external effects that are part of our food system. So as the first speaker for today, I will in a moment hand over to the virtual floor to Eberhard Brandes, who is our CEO at WWF Germany. Eberhard has been with WWF even longer than myself. And let me tell you, Eberhard is a very passionate speaker in terms of protecting our planet's resources, connecting humans and nature in harmony, and conserving biodiversity and ecosystems. Eberhard, can you please give us a first impulse on the topic at hand?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanya, and good morning, good evening to everyone. I'm very happy and thankful to be a part of this very, very important session. Prices are one of the fundaments of our economy and so of our living style and living together. And therefore, it is so crucial because it's logic that prices and costs tell the truth. But do they tell the truth? What we are doing, what we are buying every day, sorry, it's not the case. And therefore, it's so necessary that we take this in the focus of our work. The prices we need should really include all the external effects that food production and consumption entails, the environmental impact, the social impact, and the climate impacts for sure. This includes, for example, water pollution, biodiversity losses. This includes labor fairness, child labor, working health, and for sure also the CO2 emissions. And true cost accounting should be a very powerful tool, not only locally, but globally, really to drive us in a more sustainable and fair direction. True cost accounting can be applied to the wide range of processing and distributing pathways and to all types of production system and all points of consumption. Last year, in cooperation with TMG, WWF published a paper with TCA really to try to describe a way forward and to make it practical, but also on the other hand, to tell the whole story also about to really, try to analyze how we can deal with that and to talk about the methods we really need. So how will true cost accounting help us to engage decision makers and stakeholders to find a real food system transformation? And let's talk about the four main target groups. The first is governments. So governments can only develop sensible food system policies, strategies, and framing conditions if they have a full understanding of all costs and side effects of their decisions. TCA can be a tool for governments to fully understand the sum of all costs of the food system and set up integrated intersectoral policy accordingly. And let me talk in a minute for 3 examples how that could be reality. First, why are we not discussing a new UN declaration about TCA? Because TCA could never work in one supply chain or just in one country. This has to be a global system, and from my point of view, it must be on the table of the UN. The second is the role of the EU. The EU can be the front runner really to develop this, to finance the research, and also give the credibility with the right data and analysis and make it real and really execute it. And another point is, imagine that we have a completely different system to analyze the supply chains, but not only the supply chains for food, but the GAP reform and the GAP on the EU level, where all subsidies are based on TCA. For sure, this will run in completely different decisions. Another point is business. Business will gain full knowledge of all costs involved in their products along the entire value chain. They will get the means to become fully transparent and communicate openly to customers, repeats the benefits on improved reputation. And I would say even more, they know the honest risk of the products they buy, they let produce, and so on. So it is also a protection of the core business to know the real external costs. Producer will be rewarded for adopting nature-positive production. True cost accounting can help them, and food system workers achieve living wages, improved social and health conditions, for example, fair trading schemes, working conditions, and food security. I think this is just self-explaining and also necessary. And in the end of the game, who decides about everything? It's the consumer. And the consumer will be better equipped to make informed consumption choices. They can rely on transparent pricing structures and the best case reliable food labeling. And talking about that, I think we have to realize that many prices of food don't tell the truth. One example is meat. Meat, if we really talk about the honest truth, should be minimum 2 or 3 times more expensive. And just a personal story, I will never forget that my grandmother told me, you know, Eberhard, I couldn't follow what is going on in this country when I was young. And when I grew up, we could just eat once a week meat because it was just too expensive and it has a very high value. Maybe that's a good thought. But let's have a look into the future. In summary, it is not only about solidarity and international fairness. It is about a real economical necessity and the base of in which way we are going forward. Because the prices of our cheap food mostly are paid by others in other countries about the topics I have just talked about. And what we have done in the past is to create a mountain of debts. And it's just a question when we have to pay back the debts. And from my point of view, it's very important that we don't waste more time just starting with TCA, make it really, and talk about real prices all over the world. The other truth of true cost accounting is, yes, like Tanya told us, it is not so easy, honestly. It is a little bit more complicated, it is complex, and to have the right analysis to get to the right tool and methods. So we need more research, we need examples, but credibility and international credibility is the basis of a real successful rollout of TCA. And it has to be adapted, from my point of view, by every man and every woman on the world, and that we can really go forward. I'm looking forward today for a very rich discussion, and especially I couldn't wait to see the execution of TCA and that we really drive it forward and we really gain many more partners to make it real. And yeah, I'm looking forward for a very rich discussion today and hopefully for some very concrete pathways forward. Thank you for this small introduction. And now I hand over back to this wonderful moderator, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this first insight into a very complex, or let's say comprehensive topic. I saw that there's a first question placed in the Q&A. I'm thinking maybe we collect a few questions first, and then we can post them to the speakers and have a bit more of a discussion then, rather than just going one by one. So I think I will move over to our next speaker. And again, as I said, do post your questions. We will collect them. We will try to answer them all. Now, as I mentioned before, we will look at the topic of true cost accounting from various angles. And we have invited speakers from diverse backgrounds to display this diversity. With that, let me move over to my next distinguished guest, Amelie Michalke. She's a research assistant at the University of Greifswald in northeastern Germany. And Amelie has been doing research on an extremely interesting academic project called Humabile. It sounds very exciting. She will tell us more about it, and especially about how this project informed a pilot project at penny supermarkets in Germany, which have basically added a second price tag for informing consumers about how much certain products should actually cost. Amelie, please tell us more about this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for having me today as a speaker. As mentioned, my name is Amelie Michalke, and I'm working at the University of Greifswald. And since the time is quite short, I will head right into my presentation. I hope everyone can see my screen now. So let me tell you about the project, How Much is the Dish? We're funded by the German Ministry for Education and Research. And I've been working in this project for 1.5 years now, but been working on the research for about 5 or 6 years, I think. And we're doing research on externalities or on true cost accounting of food, the sole reason why we're meeting here today. Let me give a very quick introduction, but I'm just going over this super quickly. Why don't we pay the true prices? We've heard a couple of reasons by Mr. Brandes already. One of the big reasons is, of course, climate change. We're not paying for the emissions that agriculture costs us during the production processes. And particularly, it is important to look at different categories of food. For example, livestock. 71% of all agricultural GHG emissions are caused by livestock, but they only provide us 30% of all produced calories. So there's a big gap between benefits and costs that we can see here. Of course, climate change or greenhouse gases are not the sole reason for externalities, but they are one of the big environmental drivers that we have been focusing on as well in our research. Let's get a little bit into the economics of this thesis. So what would happen if we were actually to include externalities in the prices of food? So of course, the price would shift upwards. This is point 1 that you can see here on the graph. The price would shift upwards in order to include all of the externalities that are produced along the agricultural value chain. And with a higher price, of course, the supply chain, the supply curve also shifts to the upper left. And with a different supply curve, the demand, so the economic theory, will drop. Higher prices means lower demand. So what the big potential of TCA from an economic perspective would be, is that we could change demand patterns with the prices that are available at the market. And this is not with artificially changing demand patterns, but actually ascribing the real price to the products and then seeing how demand would shift. And in the end, this could reduce agricultural, ecological, and also social damages, because the products that cause these high costs, these high externalities, would be demanded less, and then to kind of meet this demand would be also produced less, and produce less of these emissions and these damages. So this is kind of the economic background behind our framework, which I will be presenting now. In our framework, it is based on paper and publication that we've published in 2020. We're basically doing 3 steps first. So first, qualifying key indicators. In our framework now, or up until this point, we've qualified the indicators of greenhouse gases, reactive nitrogen, energy use, and land use change along the agricultural value chain. Now, we have to keep in mind that these are, of course, not all externalities that are caused in the agricultural context. These are only ecological damages, and also not all of them. And also social damages like animal welfare, or also fair wages for workers along the chain, are not internalized or included in this framework as of now. We're still researching, but this is the status quo. In the second step, we're quantifying these indicators for different foodstuff categories. As I've mentioned before, it is super important to look not only at the whole value or at the whole agricultural system, but looking at different products. So we're quantifying these emissions for different plant-based, animal-based, and dairy products to kind of really see the alternatives, and to also inform the consumer about alternatives that are out there on the market, to then make better decisions, basically. But this differentiation is not the only thing that we do. We also differentiate between organic and conventional production, because there are different production practices allowed or not allowed in organic and conventional production, and they of course cause different forms of emissions and different values of damages, basically. So this is kind of the natural sciencey background of this whole framework, and then we're moving on to the economics of it. So we're looking at the units of emissions, as I said, greenhouse gases, energy production, land use change, and also reactive nitrogen. And we're using cost-benefit analysis to put a price tag on these emissions. these prices are, for example, provided by the IPCC or the German Umweltbundesamt, the Federal Environmental Agency. So there are cost benefits analysis that describe how high the monetary damage of these ecological externalities are. And then in the last step, of course, we look at these external costs or these true prices in comparison to the current market price. So first, we look at how high would the true price actually be when we were to include these externalities in the market price. And then also, how high would the surcharge, the necessary surcharge be? So relatively speaking, how different is the current market price with the true price as of now? So this is basically the theoretical background behind it, quite briefly explained, but I am sure I can answer some questions after. And then what we did with this framework is, of course, using it for academic publications, but then also, which is super exciting for me as a researcher, using this and bringing it into practice. We did a case study with the German supermarket Penny, and we calculated second price tags for 18 different products in their market. They opened a sustainability flagship store in Berlin in 2020. And in this flagship store, there were different things that they discussed throughout the store. So for example, sustainable fishing or PET bottles or stuff like that. And then one more informational point was the true cost point. You can see here on the left, the consumers were able to kind of get more information on a touch point about the background of this research project. And then also the price tags, which you can see here on the right of different food categories, were displayed in the market. Maybe to give you a little bit of a roundup on how expensive or how high these prices are. On the left, you can see the price, the externalities for plant-based foods, and on the right side, you can see them for animal-based foods. And the difference here is quite astounding, I think. When we're talking about plant-based foods, we talk about an extra price tag of about, or the highest would be 20 cents. But when we look at the animal-based products, it's more than 11 euros per kilo of the product. So the differences are quite astounding here, I think. And then, as I mentioned as well, looking at the relative surcharge, so comparing the true prices with the current market prices, we can also see that animal-based foods are far off of the current market price. So the current market prices are quite inadequate for all of the products. But when we look at plant-based, the surcharge isn't as bad. So it's about 4% that is kind of off, or the difference between the current and the true price. But then animal-based foods, and especially conventionally produced meat, would necessitate a surcharge of more than 173%. So we have a huge gap between the current prices and the true prices. What we can see is that conventional surcharge would have to be higher in each category. And this is because yes, the externalities are higher in almost all of the categories, but also because the current market prices of conventional foods are so low. And then also animal market prices, as I said, are currently much too low. These are the price tags that are displayed in the penny market that are currently also still seen or on display for the customers. And what we did then, because we wanted to find out how the consumers are kind of reacting to this and how the whole perception is we did a consumer survey of about, I think it was 109 participants in the survey. Just a very brief intro into this paper. It's also published, was published this January. It's also open access if you're interested in more of the backgrounds. We asked about the willingness to pay. So would consumers be willing to pay for the true prices? And yes, most of them would be willing to pay for apples, for example. They would be 9 cents more expensive per 500 grams. The picture is a little bit different for cheese. We would have to pay €1.75 for 400 grams extra. So only 43% of the consumers would be willing to pay this. And then for meat, the picture looks quite different. Only 32% of the asked people were willing to pay these extra €4.83 per 500 grams of meat. So what we're able to see in this consumer survey is that the attitude towards this whole topic is very positive, and people find this super, super interesting and sensible. But then are they actually willing to go this far and pay for these true prices? Well, that is a little bit of a different story, but what I want to really stress here is that some of these people are just not able to afford these prices. And this is why it is so important, and I really, really want to emphasize this point, is that we have to look for TCA measures that are socially just, that don't exclude some social structures, and that don't exclude people that are just not able to financially afford these true prices. And also that don't put all of the blame towards the farmers, because people and farmers are the ones that actually suffer from this agricultural system that we have created as a global population. So we have to find measures that kind of include these externalities in a socially just way. And then what we also were able to find in consumers and expert surveys is that policymakers are held responsible throughout the whole consumers and experts for implementation approaches. So we need political action to really bring this into fruition. This was a very, very brief introduction towards our research, and I'm really excited for questions now. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amelie. This has been very, very interesting. And some of the first questions have been coming into our Q&A. Now I'm thinking that maybe it's best if the majority of the questions can be handled, and maybe the speakers can answer in writing. We might not be able to answer all of them in orally, but I do see that there's one question that was posed and that Eberhard indicated would like to answer this live now. Maybe we go ahead with this question. Eberhard, are you ready? Do you want to answer this question now that you indicated? Maybe he's not quite there yet. We will come back to it later then. Maybe I was thinking that we, after the speakers, we can have a bit of a Q&A session, time permitting. We will have to see. We have a number of speakers lined up, really, so we will have to see how much time is left. But maybe for now we collect the questions. The speakers have a look at what they can answer already in writing, and I will come back to the discussion after. So with that, let me move over to the next speaker. In his short introduction, Eberhard mentioned it already. WWF partnered with TMG, a think tank on sustainability issues. And together we've been publishing a TCA study, mainly meant to inform decision makers and as a political discussion paper. So today we've got here Alexander Müller, who is one of the founders of TMG. And he can look back at a long political career, both within Germany and also internationally at UN level. He's very, very experienced politically, and he will introduce the study, not in too much detail, but give you some corner points, mention some of the facts that we have, and especially in terms of implications to decision-making and political transformation. With that, I hand over the floor to you, Alexander.
Thanks a lot, Tanja. I'm trying to share my screen. And please tell me if you can see the full picture.
Yes, perfect.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to you, Tanja, for inviting me, and to Eberhard for introducing the study. I'm going to present some of the results of our joint study on TCA and dietary patterns. But please, before going into the subject matter, I need to make an introductory remark. The world is going to face another food crisis. We already see it. Prices for agricultural commodities are going up. Energy prices are going up. More people will get hungry. This is linked to high energy prices and the war in Ukraine. And now a lot of people are going to tell us prices are going up. Why are you talking about true cost accounting? The prices are already high enough. Let us be very clear. True cost accounting has nothing to do with what is currently happening at the global commodity markets. What is happening now is the impact or the result of a failed globalized system. I'm not against globalization, but the current system is failed, and we will see, based on which assumption we apply, that maybe dozens or maybe hundreds of millions of people will go hungry. For me, this is another proof that we have to use true cost accounting, because a system that is built on having very high negative externalities will sooner or later destroy itself. And therefore, even if the times are difficult to talk about food prices and true cost, let us not shy away to mention that the current system is built on inequalities, that is externalizing very high costs, and that this is not sustainable. And therefore, the time is always good to talk about true cost accounting. Sometimes we will get a lot of resistance and sometimes we will get more support, but let's continue to do it. So I'm going to present true cost accounting and dietary patterns with a focus on what does it mean for policies. So you all know it. You get on the weekends, you get advertisements in your mailbox, buy cheap meat, buy cheap food. And of course, we don't believe it. Nobody really believes that at this time last year, €4.79 per kilo of meat is the real cost of meat. This is only what we pay for it in the supermarket. And therefore, and I would like to thank Emily for having introduced their great work with Penny, we have to look at externalized costs. We have to look at natural capital. Emily presented it. But let us not forget social capital, the impact on social systems, and also the impact on human health, because food in the end has to be consumed by humans and there are positive or negative effects. My main message here is when we are applying true cost accounting, we have to do it in a systemic way. It does not make sense to select here and there a little bit of a true cost accounting and to say, oh, I'm better than the other one. We have to look at the food system as a whole in order to ensure that we are really transforming the system towards sustainability. So what is it when we are talking about food systems? 1 minute to present the complexity of the food system where TCA has to deal with. So we have many diverse production systems in the world, and they are employing 1.5 billion people. These production systems are embedded in complex biological and climatic feedback loops at several levels. They are embedded in a social and economic system that transforms agricultural production into food. And then we have a huge system of food delivery to markets. We have many government policies, and let us not forget corporate strategies of big and powerful industries. And food systems are interacting with consumers, and there are different preferences, and in the end, it's all about human health. And agriculture is one of the areas in the world where technologies are continuously reshaping food systems, and they are interacting with cultures and values. This is the food system. And true cost accounting tries to capture this whole food system in a systemic and systematic way. And I'm convinced and sure that my friend and colleague Salman in the panel discussion will highlight it, because we had started in, I think Salman is 2015, to work on the Deep Agri-Food framework that tries to capture everything. Okay, so true cost accounting can be applied at different levels. It can look at the food system as a whole, global, national, regional level. It can analyze products in the value chain. Emily has presented it with the great penny example, but it can also look at the true costs of different dietary patterns. I will focus on the last one, but I will embed it in a brief presentation of the first two items. So, analyzing the food system at a global level. You might have seen this chart. It's coming from the Food and Land Use Coalition, and they are looking at the global value of all food produced in the world. And their rough estimate is around 10 trillion US dollars. 10 trillion, you can find the figure 9 trillion or 12 trillion. So it's a rough estimate. But what this FOLU coalition has also presented is that the negative externalities on health in terms of obesity, undernutrition, pollution from pesticides and AMR resistances, the impacts on the environment, greenhouse gas emissions, depletion of natural capital, and looking at how much social structures have been destroyed, that the combined negative externalities of the food system is higher than the value produced in the food system. So there are more and more studies available, and they all come to the same result. Our food system produces more negative externalities than it produces value. So something must be very wrong. So true cost accounting can provide and justify an overview why we need to transform systems. But this is a very rough overview, and therefore I would like to present one slide of how can it be translated into the value chain. So if you look at the products in the value chain, we can make the true costs of different products visible. And I'm presenting one example of a study, and we have just published a book on a true cost from a true cost initiative, where we were doing, and Tanya, you are absolutely right, it's really complex. We were looking into the data of a given food company into their supply chain. We were trying to find out what do we know about, this is the example of natural capital only. We also looked at social capital and impact on human capital. We were looking at what do they know and where do we have to compute variables. What do we know about the soils there? What do we know about rainfall patterns? And then we calculated an indicator of soil erosion, how much kilogram of soil per hectare will be depleted, or how much soil erosion is going to happen to produce a product. And then we translated it into a profit and loss statement. We produced a balance sheet, and then we could not only showcase for the company and for this very concrete product how much natural capital has been consumed, or in organic agriculture, how much natural capital in terms of soil organic carbon has been built up. We could also provide the companies with a risk analysis. We told the companies, if you continue to produce in this way, maybe in 20 years, your soil will be depleted and there's a high risk that you cannot continue to produce. This is very similar to what Amelie has presented. We went into the supply chain and we analyzed it for some companies, and these are the companies HIP, Primavera, Lebensbaum, EOSTA. We work together with Miserio and the GLS Bank, Martin Bauer Group, and we have been supported by EY. And this is the product, the book you can download from our website with the methodology. Now I'm coming to the dietary patterns. Why do I have to do 2 steps before? Because if we don't know the impacts of the global food system on natural, social, and human capital at global level, if we don't know how this will be translated into different products of a given company, we will not be able to look at the cost of different dietary patterns. Because dietary patterns shape to a huge extent the way agricultural products are produced. They are shaping also reactions of policy, and on the other hand, policies are shaping dietary patterns. So the book we have presented, we have worked together with our friends from WWF. You can download it here, and I will show you a few examples. You see the average daily protein requirement as recommended by nutritionists, and you see different countries, left India, then Asia, excluding China and India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and you see that there are different inputs for proteins. In orange, you have the animal-based protein input, and here in this light greenish, you have the plant-based protein. And you see that in India, for example, the plant-based protein is a lot bigger than the animal-based protein. And if you go to the other side, to the US and Canada, you see that the animal-based protein intake is much bigger and the plant-based protein is smaller. Now remember the presentation of Emily, where she said there are different externalities if you go to proteins, and you can see that the different dietary patterns, the protein intake itself, even if you don't distinguish between organic meat or organic plants and non-organic products, is huge. And therefore dietary patterns are really shaping the footprint of our food consumption. The same is important if you look at something which is very often forgotten. In our system where we consume highly processed food, a lot of chemicals are embedded in our food system. And I would like to focus only on the endocrine disrupting chemicals. They are used in food and agriculture with some pesticides, but also to improve, in brackets, taste and preserve flowers. There's a huge health impact. We know that there are strong linkages with both male cancer and female breast cancer, and there are costs associated to it. In the European Union, 217 billion, and in the US, 340 billion. These are externalized costs of a dietary pattern that is based on highly processed and highly packaged food. And this is very, very often forgotten. So the impact does not only happen at the farm level, it also happens at the processing and distribution level. And I would like to give you another example of the global maize production. The majority of maize is produced as raw material for livestock, sweeteners, oil industry, and. And in the US, production of corn is considered a high-tech industry. GMOs, pesticides, remote sensing, insurance schemes, and very often traditional agronomists are telling us this is the most efficient way to produce food. My question is it really? Because one of the products made out of corn is high fructose corn syrup. It's used as a sweetener for soft drinks. 40% of all sweeteners for soft drinks are coming from high fructose corn syrup. It's also hidden in fruit juices, in breads, and everywhere. High fructose corn syrup has a low nutritional value, but contributes to an increase of diabetes and hypertension. So if you look at a system where soft drinks are part of a diet, over the last 50 years, the average consumption per capita of high-calorie sweeteners increased in the US by 18 kilos, and the high fructose corn syrup accounts for 80%. There are subsidies. Production of this fructose syrup gets a subsidy of around 250 million every year, and over the last year, since 1986, it's $4 billion US. But there are huge unaccounted negative externalities. Obesities and diabetes type 2, soft drinks are one of the drivers. There's an intensive use of pesticides and fertilizers with all the negative impacts. We know that the runoff from production of corn via Mississippi has created large-scale dead zones in the ocean. Therefore, the question is, if agronomists are telling us corn production, GMO, pesticides is very efficient and cheap, how expensive is cheap corn if you take into account all of these externalities? So my conclusions: dietary patterns expose all the positive and negative externalities of our food systems in one place. So it's like a focus, and they provide a framework for comprehensive analysis. To achieve food system transformation, we have to look at a set of policies to put into praxis that is really developing a new type of consumption models. The old policies, including the Common Agricultural Policy in the US and the Farm Bill the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe and the Farm Bill in the US, they are supporting dietary patterns that in the end are very, very expensive for society. And we have over 100 countries with national dietary guidelines. Only a handful have incorporated environmental sustainability. So I think one of the conclusions of our study is, if you do dietary guidelines, look at natural capital, look at social capital, because otherwise the food might be healthy for humans, but it is produced in a way that undermines food security in the medium run. And TCA can be used to develop these frameworks that are both supply and demand driven, starting from dietary patterns, but also paying attention to the diversity of diets, both within and between countries. And back to you, Tanya, it is very complex, but the food system is full of vested interest. It's complex itself. And if we want to change it, let's avoid one mistake. Either we apply TCA in a systemic way, or it will open the door to advanced greenwashing. Countries will tell us we are sustainable because they only show a small range of what they are doing. And we need a systemic analysis in order to tell countries you are or you are not sustainable.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I've just been frozen here now. I hope I'm back online. Great. Thank you. I saw in the background that our speakers and panelists, our team here has already started answering some of the questions in the Q&A. So I encourage this kind of side conversation to go on, because as you can see, we are very tight on our timing. So I think I should for now continue with the speakers, and we will see how much time we have left for questions after the speaking slots. So without further ado, for now, I will move over. And in order to be looking at the different aspects of true cost accounting, we have next invited an organization that is especially focused on the social aspects of food systems and TCA, and to give us their input on this. So Susanne Breuer works for Miserior, which is an organization committed to fighting poverty and supporting human beings in need. Susanne told me about her international experiences from regional studies and later work focused on Latin America. So she will now focus her presentation on the social aspects of TCA from a global South perspective. Very interesting, Susanne. I can't wait to hear it. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for this introducing words, and thank you very much for inviting me to this important event. I would like to share with you a presentation I prepared. I hope you can see it. Is it okay? I hope
yes,
so.
perfect.
Yes, okay, fine, thank you. Imagine that in the supermarket, the fairly traded organic pineapple is suddenly cheaper than the conventionally produced fruit. At first, you don't trust the price tag, but at second glance, it becomes clear the price of the organic fruit does not only refer to the cultivation and transport costs, it also takes into account the lower subsequent costs for social and environmental damage of the more sustainably grown fruit. Because if the cost for ecological and social damage are included, then the organically produced pineapple, it's proportionally much cheaper than conventionally grown pineapple. We have already heard now how that could be calculated by the former speakers, and I think it is. We all understand why it would be like this. And we already heard also that the way we produce, distribute, and sell our consumer food today causes significant damage to the environment, to rural populations, and to everyone's health. we pay for this destruction in a visible way and often and very often in a hidden ways. These costs and their consequences are often passed on to future generations or on other countries. And as Tanya mentioned, Miseria looks especially to the countries of the global south, especially where especially poor and vulnerable population is living. And they are currently very affected, much more affected by the impacts of these hidden costs like climate change, soil degradation, rainforest destruction, unfair working conditions, and impact on health. We heard a lot of examples, but we think in the global south it's much more significant, these negative impacts. We have here an example which the Boston Consulting Group, they calculated for the German agriculture what is the gross value added in Germany for the agricultural sector, and what is the negative impact, the costs that it is producing on at the same time. You can see here the gross added value for the German economy in 2017 was about 3,000 billion euros, and 0.7% of it was from the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector produced about 21 billion euros of gross added value, but at the same time, the damage or the negative impact produced by the same agricultural sector was 4 times higher than the gross added value. It was about, it's estimated 90 billion euros. I can show you only this about the German agricultural sector because we haven't got these numbers for another country, but we have project partners in Bolivia who are planning to make the same estimation or study for a department in Beni in the lowlands of Bolivia, and they want to compare the costs between agroecological and conventional agriculture. So we would like to support this study and this so that it will be possible to develop a concept for more sustainable agriculture in this very affected lowland area affected by deforestation and agro-industrial production. This project is called SIPCA, and we hope that we can advance and in the next time show you some figures about Bolivia. What does this all what we mentioned about the German agricultural sector in the global south? You can see here a farm in Tapajós in Brazil, which produces soybeans for the international market, especially for the production of meat. We already heard that the production of meat is especially doesn't show the real cost that the production produces. The effects of the monoculture production, like use of pesticides, pollution of groundwater, effect on climate change, loss of rainforest, impact on health, are not reflected in the price of the soya, and even less in the price of the meat that we buy in the supermarkets. We have a lot of impacts on the social capital, like human rights impacts, violations, like evictions and displacement. We know that this is very difficult to monetize, but we think it is very important to consider these social impacts and the threat of human rights defenders. We have a lot of negative effects of this kind of production that we don't consider and don't see in our prices, and we think we need a mix of measures to change for a better for the local population. Another example I would like to give you is cacao production in Western Africa. We have a project partner, it's called INADIS, and they explained to us that Côte d'Ivoire is the world leading country in cacao production with just over 2 million tons in 2017 and 2018. However, conventional production methods are increasingly reaching environmental, health, and ethical limits. National studies have shown evidence of water pollution and sediment deposition in groundwater near large cacao plantations where chemical fertilizers and pesticides are used. In the same areas, various chlorine residues have been found in fish organs and pesticide residues in human breast milk. Well, we heard already about the negative health impact of this kind of the use of pesticides. One big problem in the cacao production in West Africa, especially Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, is the high level of child work on the fields and on the plantations. Just in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, we have 1.6 million children working in the cacao farm with dangerous pesticides and with machetes. The cacao industry, there had been a lot of pressure on the cacao industry in 2001, so that the manufacturers gave in after long battles behind the scenes. And they came to an agreement on a voluntary basis. The result of the agreement was to reduce child labor by 70% by 2015. But this target hasn't been reached till now, and now we have 2022. And so if you think about since 2001, there was this discussion and pressure on the manufacturers, and on a voluntary basis, there was no result. There were no change for better. And even in the pandemic, the number of children work in cacao plantation has increased more. So we think what can be done, we think we have to speak the same language as the companies to achieve a change, which is speaking about money and about balances. To harm nature, to harm human beings, and must be more expensive than to do no harm, to protect nature and to protect human beings, to pay just wages. It is estimated that child labor, well, it's difficult to monetize it, but it is estimated that child labor, like 4 hours per day, is monetized at 40,000 euro. And so if to employ children on the cacao plantation is so much more expensive than to do not. So we think that it could be a shift or impulse a change in the for the companies to do not, and to reach a better situation for the people on the ground. There exist already good instruments and concepts which take into account fair wages, less damage to the environment, like fair trade companies with organic production. They were already mentioned, like the GEPA company. Miseria's shareholder of the company GEPA, a company which imports and sells since more than 50 years fair and ecological products. But we see it is still a niche in the German market. It has only 5% of the German this market. At the same time, we know that over 95% of the products in the German food sector are not produced in this way. Sustainable production is the exception. Some other companies are on a good way, like HIB, it was already mentioned within the True Cost Initiative, or the GLS Bank. We think that many fair trade instruments are very good and should become guidelines for the necessary legal regulations of international value chains. But the idea is to create systemic change and to have more impact, and to push governments to create the legal framework for it. So the handbook was already mentioned, and you have already the link to this handbook. We participate in this initiative, and I think it is a very good instrument and is a very good basis to advance and to come into a discussion with various stakeholders, like institutions, universities, like companies. And we see that the development of indicators for true cost is a very important tool. So we have natural capital, we have human capital and social capital. And for this, we have the development of these indicators can really a big step to a development and to advance in the TCA. Well, I think I would like to present you now we see as Miseria and with our other NGOs in Germany a new opportunity with the new German government. The coalition agreement between Social Democrats, the Greens and the Liberals, they have integrated true cost accounting somehow in the coalition agreement. They said there, it says, we want to integrate ecological and where appropriate social values into existing accounting standards and dialogue with the business community. We support fair competition with fair prices and the development of criteria for an ecological footprint. We see that this could be and serve for us to make more pressure on the German government and to come into a dialogue with government, with the business community, and with other stakeholders. So Miserior in charge of a feasibility study, which was realized by Dr. Janine von Wolfersdorf, a tax consultant. And on this basis, we developed a positive position paper with demands and proposals to the German government on basis on this coalition agreement. I just shortly mention it because we have no time to go deeper into it. So the idea is that the federal government commissions a publicly funded feasibility study on concepts, approaches, and implementation perspectives of true cost accounting. We need a reform to the existing accounting and financial reporting system. The aim is a systemic expansion of existing standards in Germany and, of course, also on the EU level. We think and we want that true cost accounting must become an integral part of the mandatory management reporting of companies in the agricultural and food sector. And it must be clarified by law that environmental and social sustainability risks must also be explicitly integrated and audited in the risk management systems of banks. We have already, I think there was a big advancements in the with greenhouse gas, oil, carbon, and gas sector. The banks were erected already, and they integrated in the risk management. But we think also that social and other sectors should be integrated into this risk management system of banks. And also, of course, we also want on the EU level that the corporate sustainability reporting directive should provide true cost indicators as essential reporting indicators. So I will stop here because I think my time has passed. Thank you very much for listening to me. And here we have some links. I will share it later on for you to go much deeper into our discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're sharing materials with you as we speak. This actually, I thought we would have more time for some questions, but the speakers have just introduced us to so much interesting and broad and comprehensive information. We will have to move on. I still would like to encourage all the speakers and everybody here on the panel to answer the questions when they're not speaking, answer the questions in the Q&A, so that we can have at least a bit of an answering of questions there. And with that, I will move on from the part of having heard some impulses and speeches to a panel discussion that we invited some more distinguished guests to for the second part of the event. We want to discuss the topic a little bit from more angles. For this panel, I'm in the splendid company of Martin van Wilden, Salman Hussein, and Robert Conrad. Let me introduce them one by one to you. Ladies first. Martin van Wilden is a senior manager at the Capitals Coalition on the Deep Agri-Food for Business project. Martin, first of all, I think we need a short explanation as to what it is that you are doing in your Capitals Coalition there for the business sector in deep agri-food. And maybe you could already relate your work a little bit to what we've heard about TCA in the presentations and what your experiences are with working with the corporate sector on this topic.
Yes, thank you, Tanya, and thank you for this invitation. And it's been great to listen to all the speakers so far. A few big questions, so I'll try to be short and brief. So the Team Agri-Food business project is part of a larger project that is led by UNEP. Salman will explain a little bit more about that after me, I suppose. And within the TEEB Agri-Food for Business project, we drafted the TEEB Agri-Food operational guidelines for business. And these guidelines very much build on the TEEB framework that Alexander also referred to earlier, and also on the natural capital and social and human capital protocol that you might be familiar with. And our guidelines very much focus on providing a methodology to business to incorporate the value provided by nature and people into business decision making. And as I said, that the protocol has 4 stages. So we do that by providing a methodology to frame, scope, measure value, and finally, of course, to apply these valuations into business practice and to improve business practice. So we help businesses to measure and value the capitals. And as we heard before, not just natural capital, but also social and human capital that are relevant to business, and not just in a monetary way. And I think maybe that's a little bit of a different focus to what we've heard so far. We also provide insights in how to conduct a qualitative or quantitative assessment, for instance, and really focus on business risks and opportunities that businesses can face by not addressing or by addressing externalities in their decision making. So really focusing on changing business practice within the value chain, rather than just the pricing element that we've been hearing so far. But of course, both approaches have their merit and are very much interlinked. And I think, well, the project that we are running, we run that in 7 EU partner countries. It's an EU funded project. So we run it in Brazil, Mexico, China, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And within each country, and we work together with local partners, and we provide training sessions to business representatives regarding these guidelines, and we support them in applying these guidelines to their business practice. And your question was also what our experiences are so far with working in with the corporate sector. So I'll relate a little bit to that. We've noticed, so the project started 2 years ago, and there's quite a bit of variation between the countries in terms of knowledge of, we refer to it as a capitals approach. So that's been interesting to see. And we've really noticed that businesses also need some guidance on how to apply the approach, but also how to go through such an assessment, and what the applications actually can be, because it's quite a wide approach. So for instance, very often businesses need a little bit of help in setting their objectives. For instance, would it help them to inform their CSR policy, or what the potential applications can be also for financial reporting? It can be used. So it's really about making the business case and actually making businesses understand that there is a business case for applying natural social capital thinking into their decision making. And what we've also seen is that for some businesses, natural capital it's a little bit, in Dutch we would say, a far from our bed show. So it's not very much linked to their current way of thinking. So it's very important to show how social and natural risks often interconnect for business, and what kind of opportunities there would be. For instance, of course, one thing an assessment could be or looking at is how the human health of their workers would be affected by pesticide usage, and how that could negatively affect their costs. And of course, the pesticide usage could also affect soil fertility. So that's something we try to show by building pathways and show how all these issues regarding externalities can relate and can provide risks, severe risks to business practice in the short, medium, and long term, but also very often, if you critically look at this, can provide opportunities as well. As I mentioned, 2 years ago, we started in the project, and we started in Mexico and Brazil. And we already have some pilot applications from those countries on our website. And we're currently collating some pilots from India and Indonesia as well. So for instance, one experience that I would like to share is from LiveUp, a company in Brazil. And they've gone through an assessment with our support. And for instance, based on their assessment, they decided to shorten their supply chain and really work with organic farmers much more directly. And in that way, they've had a cost benefit, and still they've been able to work with organic producers now. Other applications, for instance, is currently in Indonesia. A company that is an agro-industry company is assessing the positive impacts of their pineapple leaf valorization. And they aim to share the report with their shareholders, and they're looking into how to build a circular system out of their waste from pineapple production. So I think there's a variety of applications that people or businesses around the world are using our guidelines for, and also how they are using the Capitals approach. So I hope that was insightful and not too lengthy either.
Thank you so much, Martin. Moving on in our panel. Also in our panel is Salman Hussein, who's been working with UNEP. We heard the TEEP Agri framework for quite some time now. And he heads the Economics of Nature unit in the Ecosystems division. Salman, you are the TEEP coordinator, and you initiated the launch of the TEEP Agri-Food in 2015. Alexander mentioned it earlier already. Can you tell us a bit about this work, and especially, again, what in these previous presentations are aspects that you would underline as particularly important in relation to your work with governments around the world?
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you. Yeah, Salman Hussein from UNEP, speaking from Geneva. Yes, we in UNEP have hosted the TEEP initiative since actually 2014 and 2015. We kind of kicked off properly. But it might be worth, because everyone's talked about TEEP, but not really, maybe not everyone knows what TEEP is. So a brief minute on that. So the acronym stands for the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. And it was actually launched over a decade ago in 2010. And the idea was, and remains, to make the economic case for biodiversity and ecosystem services. So very similar to the Stern review of climate change, making the economic change to mitigate climate now, which occurred just before the TEEP review. We had the 2010 process, and since then, trying to make sure that decision makers recognize, demonstrate, and then capture the values of nature in their decision making. We're still ongoing because that still is a requirement. Policymakers aren't doing that. And in 2014, 2015, we switched gear. And whereas the work before that had been global in nature, global in sense of across all the sectors in the economy, we looked at agriculture, and obviously everyone on this call is aware that the externalities and impacts and dependencies across the value chain are myriad. They're very significant, as we know from the presentation and the slides, such as the one that Alexander presented. And we need to do something about it. We need to get policymakers to shift. So to your question, in terms of what are we doing in terms of government, and how have the presentations, how could we inform that decision making? Well, the first thing to start with by saying is that we're working with the 7 countries in the EU funded project, which has been mentioned, which Martina is coordinating the work package on business for. But we're also working with 4 or 5 other countries, including with the German government, ICI, working on tea bag food for ICI under an ICI project as well. And what I'd like to start by saying is that, there are success stories. So let me give you one or two examples. So in Indonesia, for instance, we have for the first time in the 5-year development plan had an insertion to support agroforestry. Now that arose directly, and we got a letter from the Director of Agriculture in Bappenas to say, our work on true cost accounting, tea bag food, contributed the evidence which allowed him to make that intervention in the submission to the president. So I think that's really important. So there are success stories already. There are a number of others. Say, for instance, we're going to have the first steering committee meeting for Malaysia, and we're going to be looking at sustainable vegetable production in the Cameron Highlands, and that's going to be chaired by the Secretary General of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industries. So this is getting prominence, it's becoming important in these mega diverse middle-income countries for the EU, as well as in other countries as well. So as to regards what creates success, so what are the impediments? I have 3 or 4 points. The first thing I'd make is that in 2010, we launched TEEB and we started talking about a 6-step process. Most people consider TEEB to be techie. A lot of what you've heard today is doing the really important technical analysis to determine what exactly are the changes in natural, social, and human capital when we shift from or compare, say, conventional production to organic production. That is critically important, of course. We in UNEP are a science-driven organization, and we have to make sure the science is robust. But before that and after that is equally important. It's the engagement, it's asking the right policy questions. It's determining what exactly is a viable, reasonable, and effective policy change that could be implemented. So for instance, I've mentioned agroforestry, cacao agroforestry in Indonesia. That's a viable intervention, which may well shift the pattern away from, say, intensive palm oil production. In India, we're looking at shifting to organic and agroforestry in 2 states with a total population of over 100 million people. So we start by thinking, how can we engage with stakeholders? What's the right policy question to ask? And then use the tool to get there. So it's important to think how the TCA tool fits into that political pathway. So the second point I'd make is that we always try to focus on locally derived benefits. When I'm speaking to the Director of Agriculture in Bappenas, of course he's interested in, and it's relevant to consider, international commitments under, say, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, or the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the Convention on Biological Diversity. But he is preeminently concerned with the well-being, welfare of the people of Indonesia. So we have to make sure that we make the case for locally derived benefits and the impacts are happening in Indonesia. Of course, it's important to think about the impact on the food plate for EU citizens. But for Bappenas, for ministers who are involved in this process of TCA, they want to know to what extent is one hand taking away from the other? If we, as Alexander mentioned, the health impacts, to what extent is it that working on farm, we have pesticide residue, which the health ministry then have to deal with? If we can show them that we are actually, it's better for Indonesia to, for instance, switch over to agroforestry or switch over to organic production, then if we make that case in economic terms and make them based on locally derived impacts, then we're more likely to get success, more likely to get policy uptake. So that was the second point. Third point, distributional impacts are really important. So for instance, we were working with the Mexican government on a GIZ-led project on maize and milpa. And what was really important was, and this is important, is thinking about the political cycle. So we're nearing the end of a political cycle. And the question is, can we actually have a policy intervention which would create distributional benefits to those who are poorest in society? Because that's the kind of change that policymakers are looking for. So we have to look at who is affected and how they're affected and make sure that's part of our decision-making and part of making the political and economic case. And the final point is we need to avoid the commodification of nature. We've had a lot of discussion, and I'm glad that Martine talked about the multiple values of nature, of human and social capital, because many countries are, and I understand why, completely averse to the notion of pricing. It's something in terms of the discourse that turns them off entirely. And I understand that. And many of the benefits that accrue from pro-nature systems cannot be put into monetary terms. So we have to think about the avoiding commoditization, but where it's sensible, reasonable, pragmatic, and where the science supports it, to apply a change and value that in monetary terms. So it's really important that we decide to what extent we allow and support the monetization, and to what extent we actually try to retain within the total picture the benefits in terms of other values, cultural, social, spiritual values even, which arise because we shift towards pro-nature alternatives. My final point, and then I'll close, is just, there was one question, I want to answer that question on variability. So the question to say, look, there's so much variability on farm, how can we actually use TCA if given that variability, given that heterogeneity? That's a problem that we've tried to contend with. And the way that we look at it in terms of TV, let me give an example, is of the states within India, okay? So what we look at is to say, look, what are the different types of ecozones, ecological zones that occur within this state? What is the variability in terms of economic, political conditions? Let's develop a typology based on that and do an analysis which covers the entirety of the state, given that typology of ecozones, of political and economic variability. Of course, we're not going to do an analysis on every farm, but if we can actually develop that typology and show that agroforestry and organic are superior to alternatives, given their externalities and impacts, then that makes a strong case. And we avoid having situations where we're supporting something in UNEP which is counterproductive. Thank you. Let me pause. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Salman. There's a lot of very, very interesting and important input, but we are getting a bit tight on time here. I will quickly move over to our next panelist, Robert Conrad. He's part of the European Commission, and he's advisor for natural capital at the Directorate General Environment. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Robert. What is the European Commission stance towards this tool or approach of true cost accounting? Is it considering applying it, or is it already applying it? What are connecting points to your own field of work that you can see?
Very well, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for inviting me to the panel. Let me just start with the very general introduction, that in order to make any meaningful change in, let's say, addressing the environmental externalities, we need to engage and mobilize the private sector. And indeed, we need to mobilize them in many ways. And so in this respect, we also are very aware, acutely aware of the idea and of the need to have the proper ways of valuing impacts and dependencies on nature, and the ways how to integrate these into the business decisions so that they become really a standard, universally acceptable standard and practice. And we are working towards the approaches that are better aligned, and of course trying to promote the wider acceptance of the accounting principles that involve natural capital and biodiversity. And these are all important work streams at the Commission under the Green Deal agenda. And also, let's be clear, we also need to redirect capital streams towards activities that benefit nature. So it's the reason why we are revising the sustainable finance strategy, while we are implementing the taxonomy regulation, which sets out criteria to define sustainable investments. And also we are reviewing the non-financial reporting directive. And that way we are already improving the quality and the scope of non-financial disclosures, including on environmental aspects. Now, as clearly stated in the biodiversity strategy, but also alluded in the farm to fork strategy, natural capital accounting is key for assessment and integration of the externalities and the risks, including biodiversity related impacts, into the decision making. And also it will provide a meaningful and operational information to investors and as well as the civil society. Now, as you may know, the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive proposal is currently in the co-decision procedure, which means it's being discussed by the European Parliament and the Council, and trialogues are expected to actually take place in April, so next month. And we are also contributing to this process. So, for example, DG Environment launched the Transparent project with a view to developing a methodology that could be used by companies for their reporting under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. There is also an expert group which is called EFRAG at the European level that is working on the first sets of the reporting standards, on the basis of which the Commission is expected to adopt the delegated act later in this year. Hopefully, the date for the moment is around October this year. And the current proposal for the new corporate sustainability reporting directive, which is to replace a non-financial reporting directive, is actually ensuring that the reporting can evolve to take account of the new developments, including the evolution of user needs and reporting methodologies. So, and in this respect, our position as DG Environment, which we have communicated to the EFRAG as expert panels who are basically working then on these methodologies, is that the methodologies should address both the impacts of companies on people and the environment, as well as the risks to companies arising from sustainability issues. Then the reporting standards, which are to be adopted under the new directive, need to be proportionate, in a sense that they will need to meet the user needs, the user also meaning the constituency like we are having here today in this workshop, while of course trying not to impose too much of the red tape on the reporting companies. The reporting standards should be drafted in a way that takes account of the frameworks and initiatives that are being currently developed around the natural capital accounting. And of course, it should all be following an integrated approach, which would be showing the interlinkages between the six objectives stated in the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And these 6 objectives are climate mitigation, adaptation, pollution, circular economy, water, and biodiversity. So we are all kind of also with the partners and several projects supported or done together with the Commission, but also outside of the Commission. We are trying to indeed make sure that the upcoming, let's say, implementing and delegated acts in the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive will have as much teeth and as much meat on the accounting of the natural capital as possible. But of course, it is a process, as I have mentioned. Now under the Green Deal, Commission has embraced this aspect of let's say reporting and under the let's say Corporate Sustainability Directive reporting very widely, not as was the case before. So we hope that of course the objectives and many of the advantages that were also mentioned today in the discussion will actually be materializing in this framework. Also thanks to the support and working together, not just of the public institutions, but of course also of the civil society and other stakeholders. So perhaps that would be enough for me for the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. We've had so much input. We've actually reached the end of our session here. It is 12 o'clock noon. Let me do a quick wrap up. And again, as I said, you will get all the materials and there will be a recording available. And we are also looking into it. Seems that we can share the Q&A with you afterwards. We've heard a series of very interesting inputs and discussions on true cost accounting. We've been given some input from the research perspective. We've looked at the practical applicability from a business point of view, and we've discussed the political implications. True cost accounting is a very complex approach. It is by no means easy to apply, and we also learned that the data for applying this is still largely missing. However, true cost accounting has the potential to draw the full picture, to give us the whole story. If done correctly and thoroughly, all the various external effects, be they negative or positive, will be accounted for. We would get an honest picture, just picture, and we would be able to follow effects along the value chain. We would be able to calculate better, adjust politics accordingly, maybe even achieve a consent on the most suitable political measures. In my view, this could be a powerful tool given the world community, giving it the means to work towards a global food system transformation. And the world food community, be it politicians, business representatives, consumers, producers, civil society, they all must come together and together develop a comprehensive model for sustainable food systems. To me, this is a good vision to be had for the future. So this is the vision we want to follow. Thank you very much for joining this discussion. I would like to thank all the speakers, the panelists, the presenters. I would like to thank the team at WWF that helped me organize this session. Let's keep at it. Let's try making this work. Let's continue striving. With this, I will close this session on TCA. Thank you for participating. Have a great day and goodbye.